Thank you for joining another episode of Leadership Lessons, where we work together to help leaders lead better. Our guest today is Dan Russell, and I could not be more excited to hear Dan's perspective on our topic of aging in ministry. Dan, thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Let me tell you about Dan. Dan Russell is a highly respected leader with experience as a pastor, associational mission strategist, minister of students, associate pastor, janitor, he says, and more. Anything that you can do in a church, Dan has done it. He's been an active part of his state convention, but Dan currently serves as a spiritual advisor at Sunrise Children's Services in Danville, Kentucky, where he's helping to lead a pilot project focused on spiritual care. Formerly on staff at Immanuel Baptist in Lexington, Dan's most recent role there was as an interim campus pastor at the Winchester Road campus. He continues to attend Immanuel, provides pulpit supply to area churches, and remains dedicated to guiding adults through various life stages and providing compassionate care to those in need. Dan, that's a mouthful, but it takes a mouthful to just touch on your recipe, or your resume. A lot of our listeners would know you, but for those who don't, tell us where you grew up and how you came to faith in Christ.
Well, after that introduction, I'm exhausted. But I grew up in actually Eastern Kentucky in Carter County.
Okay.
Started serving in Ashland. I was raised in a non-Christian home.
Okay.
Wasn't saved till I was 25 at Immanuel Baptist Church under Charles Stewart.
Yep.
And from there, I would work with the youth, worked in a mission church. We had 5 what we call mission churches then. Now we call church plants.
Yeah.
We had 5 mission churches going at one time. I ended up preaching in one of those while I was going to seminary. But at the age of 31, God just got a hold of me and said, "Hey, I want more from you. I just desire for you to do some more." And I told the Lord, "I'm doing all I can do, man. I'm now a deacon in the church. I'm one of the youngest deacons. I'm working with youth and all this stuff." And so for 3 years, God and I literally struggled. And I know I'm not the only one who's got this story, but I should have a limp, because of the struggle with God. At that point in time, at the age of 34, I surrendered to ministry, left my career at the time, and ended up going to Southern Seminary. And then from there, I was pastoring one of the little mission churches, and then pastoring in Ashland for a while, then became director of missions. Miss pastoring, that's my calling, that's my desire, that's my heart. And so I ended up going to Central Baptist Church in Paris, and spent about 13 years there. Great ministry, just very, very, just fulfilling ministry. I got to the point, I was in my mid-60s. I was preaching 2 services on Sunday morning, 1 Sunday night, doing Wednesday night Bible study, and thought, well, I'm too old. I realize now the problem was I was doing too much. Mm-hmm. But ended up going to Immanuel as senior adult pastor, basically, life and care pastor, and spent some great time there with Ron Edmondson. Mm-hmm. I've retired from there 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
And they keep calling me back. I don't know why they keep calling me back. But anyway, spent some time there, and then, like you said, I just finished up an interim at our Winchester Road campus. It's been a year there, and I really enjoyed that.
And I love the pilot project you're doing now with Sunrise. But you said something early in your answer that I didn't realize you came out of Rose Hill with Charles Stewart. Lots of people came out of there. You were a contemporary, yes, probably of Paul Badgett. There was a man.
Paul Badgett and I were deacons together.
A man named Kent Workman was there for a while, and I think Kent surrendered, yes, from there. What did you learn from Charles Stewart? He bivocational, obviously busy guy, but what did you learn from him about ministry, Dan?
I think just from Charles, the work ethic, yeah, of ministry. I watched Charles do. Again, he was a bivocational pastor. I've seen the church grew from, I think, 30 or 40 to over 600 at one time. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he could do funerals and visit, and he always had a phrase: "If you sit on their couch, they'll sit in your pew." So, yeah, it was, and he practiced that.
It's still a good example for. It's harder to get into homes today, but everything works off relationships. Well, let's get into our topic. So we're talking about aging in ministry, and I'm excited about this topic because I'm aging and I'm in ministry. and have been excited to listen to you. So ministry no doubt changes as you have more experience and greater maturity as a Christian. How has your perspective on ministry changed over the years, Dan?
I think the big change for me personally has been through the years, recognizing this God's ministry, not mine.
Okay.
I went from the place where I took all the load and all the weight and all the burden, whether the church succeeded or did not succeed, to finally got to the point in my life I realized this is God's ministry. If He wants us to succeed, it will. And I was able to turn it over to Him. One of the things about getting older, you learn to turn a lot of things over to the Lord that maybe you tried to hold on to.
Dan, you just said something there that I think is a real issue for probably the vast majority of pastors, ministry leaders, that this is God's, not mine, and yet I'm still carrying the weight for it. Do you remember exactly how that happened, that you reach a place, or was it over just a season of time, or was there a moment where that happened?
It was over a season of time, I think, and also I think there was two periods in my life where I didn't call it burnout.
Yeah.
It was more exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned one when I was at Central with the fact that I was doing all I was doing, and I'm in my 60s. In an earlier church back in Ashland, I experienced the same thing about 10 or 12 years into that ministry, and then you exhausted yourself.
Yep.
And I think I wish the church would understand. I wish pastors would understand, first of all, that it's not all yours, but I wish churches would understand it's not all the pastor as well.
Yep.
And I hope we're moving along from where we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Our mindset was the pastor did everything.
Yep.
Back when the Charles Stewart model, not a bad model at all, but It was one that talked about the pastor being so involved.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the benefits of serving the Lord. As you're in further seasons of maturity and experience, what are some benefits that you've experienced as serving the Lord in this season that kind of make it even more enjoyable, maybe even than some earlier seasons?
Oh, this is the best season. I'm really enjoying this point at this time in life. In fact, I told my wife just today how much I'm enjoying this point in life, because you don't have the pressures. The expectation is not as much, for one thing, because your age. Yep. But the other thing is that you have learned how to just pace yourself, and you recognize that you can't do everything. And physically, you can't any longer. Energy-wise, you can't any longer. That makes you depend a lot more on the Lord. Mm-hmm. Todd, I would say this: I am closer to the Lord today than I've ever been in my life.
Wow. Now,
part of it is I know I'm going to be going home to see the Lord in a short period of time. But the real truth of that matter is that my life now is more pursuing the Lord and His presence than it is pursuing building a church, reaching goals, satisfying people. And so with that, it's a special time. I really am enjoying, because me and the Lord walk together a lot now.
Pete Scazzaro has done some research on aging in ministry and effective ministry seasons. He echoes what you just said, that your 60s and 70s can be the first or second most fruitful season of your ministry, and it seems like you're experiencing some of that.
Yes.
Why do you think that is, Dan? Why do you think it is that those seasons can be more impactful than others, possibly? And maybe you just answered it, your dependence on God.
And I think, what I said earlier, I think the expectation that you put on yourself is not as great as it used to be, because you know that energy-wise, and you can't do all the things that you'd like to do. The humbling thing today is, for me, when I'm doing some things at my house, is to tell my son, when you're over, can you do this for me? Because I don't want to go on the ladder anymore. Those kind of things.
Dan, Connie and I have those conversations. We have a fence behind our house that requires painting every so many years, and she said, "Are we going to want to keep doing this?" I said, "Connie, those are grandchild jobs at some point. At some point you bring your family into these things." Dan, so we talked about some of the benefits and joys. What are some of the challenges of ministering in your latter 60s, your 70s, and then those that who are even in their 80s and beyond? What are some challenges that you hear about or experience?
Well, I think, again, energy is part of it, obviously. You don't have the energy you had when you were in your 30s and 40s. And I think the other thing is that, Todd, we're going through such change.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to keep up with what's going on is a real challenge. As you guys have already learned, I have a challenge with technology. I learned a long time ago with technology. I decided I didn't want to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't need to learn it.
All right.
And so I turn it over to guys like Frank and others that just can take it and run with it, because I don't need to learn all the new tech, even with my cell phone. And that effect, of course, is with young people. Working at Sunrise, I work directly with a lot of young adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like I'm back in the ministry again in a fresh new way, and
Wow.
that I can minister one-on-one with some folks that, honestly, it's not plain church. It's being in their lives, hearing what they're going through, hearing their struggles, that it's really fulfilling.
Dan, you're describing marketplace ministry there.
Yes.
Because you're talking, I mean, you're interacting with folks who are believers and not believers. And give us you obviously don't share anything inappropriate that you shouldn't share, but a story or an example of how you're interacting with someone and you're just trying to learn about their life, how you can minister to them. How do you go at that?
Well, just in general, no, we live in a time today where, as you know, marriage is not practiced as commonly it was back when I was first married. So I deal with a lot of just in the marketplace where you are. In fact, I asked a young lady the other day in a restaurant if she wanted me to pray for her, and she said yes. She said, "Me and my fiance," that's a word that's used a lot. We have been together for 6 or 7 years, and we're having trouble.
Yep.
And so I try not. I don't judge that.
Sure.
It's not my place. She said she is a Christian. So I just offered her some old man advice and had her prayer. So that's that kind of interaction I'm having a lot with even the young folks at Sunrise. You know, they're going through young adult issues, and not only dealing with the children at Sunrise, but just in their own lives. So that gives me an opportunity, you know, not to judge. I don't come in judgmental. I just say, right. You know, this is what I can share my experiences in life. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I honestly can't remember. It was Carrie's one of Carrie's podcasts, but only the guy was talking about our different stages in life. Mm-hmm. So I found out now that I'm a sage.
Okay.
So I looked up sage. What does a sage mean? Well, I first looked it up. It said it was a flavoring you put in food. So I don't know what that meant, but maybe I am a flavoring that you put in food. But it said basically a person of wisdom. Now, I question my wisdom, but I think I'm a person of common sense. Mm-hmm. And I've gone through the wars and gone through the battles. And so I was able to, I think, be able to impart some wisdom, if you would, common sense, because of the battles I've gone through in life.
Well, Dan, you are at that season where you're kind, you're non-judgmental to people, and you really are able to step up and say, I'm going to offer some unsolicited advice to you, and you're telling them up front what you're doing, and then you're sharing something that could really be helpful. I'm grateful for that in your life. What disciplines have helped you stay faithful? You mentioned your walk with the Lord. What over the years has helped you stay faithful and resilient in ministry?
Obviously, prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer is, one of the things that even now I look back at it, I wish I had spent more time in prayer. But now, time in prayer, I'm rereading Tim Keller's book on prayer. I read it probably 2 or 3 times, and other books on prayer. But just spending time with the Lord is the greatest. To have a wife that's very faithful, very supportive, has been awesome. She married an accountant with a career. She didn't marry a preacher. Mm-hmm. And she's been able to travel along with me on all these journeys from different city to different city and church situations, and being a pastor's wife. And she, I think, is the ideal pastor's wife. She sits back and helps when needs be, and is quiet when needs be, but she does a great job at that. And she's been my biggest fan and supporter.
That makes all the difference. Dan, some folks, when they hit a latter season in the year, sometimes it happens in their 60s and beyond, they may begin to question their value in ministry and have some doubts whether or not God can use them. Has that happened to you? And whether it has or hasn't, what would you say to those men in ministry leadership?
I would say that happens in all stages of life in ministry,
Mm-hmm.
that you question your effectiveness. One of the things, Todd, occasionally, I know you have too, is you think, well, am I really reaching people? Am I really making a difference?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get that little text or that little email from somebody 20 years ago
Yep.
who remembered your ministry, remember a sermon you preached.
Yep.
We need those. Those are encouragements that, the ministry can be very trying. It can exhaust you, and you feel like that am I making a difference? But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's not just true of some in their 60s and 70s. I think that's true of the guys in their 20s and 30s and 40s as they tackle the ministry.
John Piper said, God shows us enough fruit of our ministry to keep us interested, and that's what you're describing right there. We see some evidence of his hand. How do you balance rest and work as your energy levels change?
You pace yourself.
Yeah.
You pace yourself more. You take more time off. You know when to say. That's something that is a new thing for me, is knowing when to say no.
Yeah.
I take our time very precious together. My wife and I spend more time together now than we've ever spent in our lives together. And I know some marriages that's a negative. Our marriage has been very positive.
Yeah.
And so I try to protect that, because she sacrificed me a lot to the ministry.
Sure.
And so now I feel like I owe that to her.
How many years have you and your wife been married, Dan?
54 years.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Thank you for your faithfulness to both of you. How have your relationships in church and with the Lord changed over time, and how have those church relationships grown richer?
Church relationships have changed, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
People are not as, I remember the day that the preacher on Sunday went home with somebody and had fried chicken.
Yep.
Those days are gone.
Yeah.
I find that, and this has always been true in the ministry, that my relationships are usually kindled around some sort of, not necessarily a tragedy, but some sort of event in a life where I'm able to spend one-on-one time with folks. Even as I was talking about counseling with young people, even at Sunrise, I recognize until they need me, I'm just there. But occasionally they're having a day that they just need me, and that's when I get an opportunity to really develop relationships.
Dan, one thing I've noticed about you and the fact that you're doing this pilot project with Sunrise, and also in your previous experience, your last assignment of leading the Winchester Road campus for Immanuel, there's a freshness about your life and ministry that you've kept yourself at a place where you can try new things, even though you're a little bit anti-technology. I understand that, but you're obviously learning as much as you need to know. What would you say has contributed to that sense of freshness where you could be open to a Sunrise pilot project doing something that's not exactly what you've done before?
Try to stay current.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of podcasts. Mm-hmm. It's an hour drive to Danville. Mm-hmm. It's giving me an opportunity to really catch up on some podcasts. But I do that, and I try to read some things to keep current. I just got finished with Mark Patterson's book, Million Little Miracles. I love that book. Yeah. I've shared it with everybody. But just, things like, I don't read as many leadership books as I used to, believe it or not, because when you've read enough leadership books, you've read enough leadership books.
That's good.
and so I find other readings, Tim Keller. I just read not one too long ago from, what's the name of, Reggie Neal wrote about the present future. I don't know if you've read that or not, but he talks about the questions that you should be asking in church that we ask too often the wrong questions.
Yeah.
It's a good book. I recommend that one.
Yeah, that's great. So in what ways has your ministry and experience opened new doors for ministry opportunities?
Well, it's just being available.
Yeah.
And the thing that it's, being at Immanuel or larger churches in the state of Kentucky, that's opened a lot of doors for me there, just being available. Certainly to do interims and preaching opportunities, and even the Sunrise opportunity, I think came through just Just my relationships there with Dale and some others. But I think just being able to be, I would say to anyone that's my age now, or is thinking of retiring, that just make yourself available and don't push it. I don't push it. I generally let it come to me. And I find God's always faithful to bring, I ask God, I think it's in Psalm somewhere where David talks about, Lord, in my old age, don't throw me out.
Yeah.
I think it's the way it's translated.
Don't
but
forget me.
I asked God that. I said, God, just use me where you want to use me. And don't want to use me, but I want to be available.
Yeah, one of my memory verses, Dan, you're referencing Psalm, I think it's 92, and I'm not sure I could find it quickly, but it's certainly pertinent to our conversation here, where the psalmist says in Psalm 92, verse 14, they will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. And
yes,
and I just think you model that. I think your life models that. And I'm really grateful to hear you say that you've kind of waited for things to come to you. You've made yourself available, but not necessarily had to force yourself. I think that's helpful. Dan, you've mentored younger leaders probably all of your adult ministry in latter years. What does that mean to you today? How do you go about it? Where do you see opportunities to invest in some guys that are just now coming up?
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love doing it. I've done it with a number of young men through Immanuel, and then back early in my time, even the Immanuel small church pastors would call him, and Ron would refer some of those to me because I had a whole lot more experience in small churches, of course. And it is a different environment. It's a different culture. I think one of the things I always tell young people, young leaders, I said, who are you?
Yeah.
I'm a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So I will never pastor a large church, because it would literally kill you. I was running 350 to 400 at Central. That was pushing my envelope.
Mm-hmm.
So I always ask the young pastors, decide who God called and who are you? Are you a leader who can lead a large congregation, or are you more pastoral in that you love relationships? And so that will keep your congregation from growing.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being either one of those.
No, not at all.
To your point,
you need
to know yourself.
Yeah.
So some people, Dan, in church life look forward to kind of checking out in retirement, not just pastors and ministers, but sometimes church members. They want to reach that stage where they don't have to do anything anymore in church. How is that a detriment to a congregation? And how do you, as a church leader, how do you help folks think about that they can be very useful in their latter years?
Well, I struggle with it because my DNA is not that, but I have seen it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is I think we end up with a loss of leaders too early in many of our churches, and we haven't come alongside some of the younger leaders, and so there's this gap in many of our churches. And I think that, Todd, we have a sort of a youth movement going, and that's great. I love it, but I think we need that combination of youth. Immanuel's a multi-generational church. I love that, but we need that. We need those young people and older people just walking beside of them. I think that's something that we're trying to accomplish at Immanuel. But I think that we do have a gap sometimes when people just want to check out.
Dan, what are some misconceptions that people might have about older leaders in ministry?
Well, they're stuck in the past, I think, is one of the concepts a lot of people think. And some may be. Mm-hmm. I've watched, Eastern Kentucky, the environment that I came out of, the background that I have. So I've watched this transition take place over the last 40 years from what I was taught originally and the traditions to what I see today. I don't think anything's wrong with it. I think the fact that you just got to recognize culture's changing. Right. Church has to address that.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people look at guys like me and they say, well, he's stuck in the past. That's why I try to read. I try to listen to podcasts and hear what young guys are talking about. John Mark Comey and guys like that, or Patterson, or J.D. Greer. what are these guys talking about, and be able to recognize the good and the bad, and hopefully be able to apply that wherever I'm working.
Yeah, I think your efforts are paying off. You can be a young leader and stuck in the past. It's easy to just be stuck, period, in your own
Yes.
mindset. I've never thought of you that way, as someone who is stuck in the past. So whatever you're doing, you're obviously being effective. You don't strike me as a person who thinks much about their legacy. But if you were to think about your legacy, how do you want to be remembered when your time's finished here? What do you hope to leave behind? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 2 foster grandchildren. I want my legacy for them to be that he loved and was faithful to his Lord, faithful to his wife and family, and faithful to his church.
Wow.
If that can be said about me, man, I'm I'm on top of the world. That's
enough. Yeah, that's
all that needs to be said.
Let's use the remainder of our time to talk about leadership. Who is one of your favorite biblical leaders? And I always tell folks, you don't have to say Jesus. It's okay if it's Jesus, but you don't have to choose the Lord if you have someone else.
Well, obviously Jesus is, but I look into biblical. I look at Moses. Yep. Certainly, Moses did some things that I think leaders should really learn from. First of all, he talked to God. He listened to God.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, I'm trying to think my list, but I put this together a few years ago. Taught a class on leadership. He was bold.
Mm-hmm.
He was very bold in what he did. He was compassionate. And the last thing, there's more than that, but the ones I'm off the top of my head, the last one would be he was willing to delegate.
Yeah.
That's one that I wish I had been better at.
Yeah.
He was, and also he was willing to develop a successor.
Yeah.
Which is Joshua. He took instruction from his father-in-law, and then he was willing to delegate. If I look back at my ministry and say, Dan, what did you do? I may be answering another question for you, but what did you do that you wish you could undo, or wish we should have done earlier in your ministry? Was delegation. I need to go back and apologize to some staff members and some church leaders because I robbed them of ministry because I thought I had to do it.
Yeah.
And so I would be more ambitious in delegating ministry to others and giving it away.
Dan, did you learn about the importance of delegation by watching other leaders who were effective at that, or just experiencing the challenges of trying to do it all yourself? How did that lesson kind of come to you that you saw delegation?
Hard knocks, the hard way, exhausting yourself.
Yeah.
I think that I didn't have a mentor as such. I'll be honest with you.
Sure.
And so I had to learn everything the hard way. And I wish early in my ministry I'd learned to do that. Again, I feel like I robbed some folks of ministry opportunities.
So you're at your season in life. If you were to look back at your 60s or maybe early 60s, what would you go back and say to 60-year-old Dan Russell that you could have been helpful at that time?
You don't have to do it all.
Yeah.
Well, in the 60s, I was starting to learn that. But when I was in my 60s and I was pastoring, I wasn't delegating as I should. And as I look back at that, I think the 60-year-old Dan would have taken a little more time off and would have had some more people do some preaching and would allow some church members to do some ministries that I was trying to lead myself.
I think you've already answered this question, but you may want to add something else to it. What advice would you give to ministry leaders who are closing in on retirement from their full-time active work and may not know what is next and may be a little concerned about stopping what they're doing before the next thing comes? What advice would you give to those? And Dan, was that an issue for you? Did you retire not knowing what was next?
Yeah, I didn't really know what was next. Again, that I use that word available. Make yourself available, but know who you are. My DNA is I have to be doing something.
Yeah.
So my DNA is I can't sit on the porch or go to the farm or go out to the pastors. We always talk about pastors going to the pastor, out to the pastor. But I think that know who you are, know your limitations, but make yourself available.
Dan, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your example in Kentucky. You've been faithful everywhere the Lord has put you and used you. And thank you for your friendship and for joining Leadership Lessons today.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a blessed day.
Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons. An audio podcast of this program is available on both Apple and Android devices. The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches, for churches, to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. For more information about the KBC and the cooperative program which fuels our ministry, go to kybaptist.org. We'll see you next time on Leadership Lessons.